It's hard to believe that one of the most evil crime sprees in Canadian history occurred in the tiny village of Tweed, Ontario. Located on Highway 37, Tweed is home to about 1,600 people, as well as 6,000 people in the surrounding municipality. Tweed also happens to be home to the smallest jail in North America, founded in 1898. And honestly, with the exception of the bars on the windows, it's the most adorable jail I've ever seen. It has 3 teeny tiny cells and stayed open for 50 years before closing in 1950 due to a lack of crime, and is now a popular tourist attraction for Tweed. Tweed is one of those stereotypical small towns, where everyone knows everyone and nobody locked their doors. That is, until the fall of 2007, when strange break-and-enters started to occur. A fetish burglar was breaking into houses and only stealing women's underwear. However, most of these burglaries would go undetected. The homeowners either didn't realize their home had been broken into or didn't report the burglaries to police out of embarrassment over what was taken. By May of 2008, there had been 22 fetish break-ins in Tweed alone. That same month, over 200 kilometers away in Ottawa, similar break-and-enters and theft of women's underwear were occurring in the suburb community of Orleans. But unlike the Tweed cases, many of these break-and-enters were reported to the Ottawa police, who at first weren't too terribly concerned. But after multiple thefts of lingerie in the Orleans area, the Ottawa police would issue a warning to the public on Halloween 2008. The break-ins would continue in both communities throughout 2009, and the intruder was becoming more aggressive, leaving taunting notes for the homeowners, stealing their photographs, and even their sex toys. And then in September of 2009, 2 bizarre home invasions in Tweed were reported to the Ontario Provincial Police. These crimes were so strange that the police themselves didn't take the first report seriously. For a brief moment, they even considered the attack had been fabricated by the victim. But after the second assault was reported just 2 weeks later, the assailant now had the full attention of the police. Both women had been tied up, blindfolded, and forced to pose for explicit photographs before the intruder vanished into the night. Investigators didn't connect the attacks in Tweed to the fetish break-ins. And even more odd, the break-ins and lingerie theft would suddenly stop altogether in late November of 2009. Police were unaware that during this time, the burglar had progressed to something much darker. And then, on January 29, 2010, 27-year-old Jessica Lloyd suddenly disappeared from Belleville, Ontario. A joint investigation between 3 different police departments was immediately established, and it wouldn't take long for them to link Jessica Lloyd's disappearance to the break-ins and attacks in Tweed, as well as a murder that occurred in the town of Brighton, only 20 minutes away. There were just too many similarities. It had to be the same offender. While examining Jessica Lloyd's property for evidence, unique tire tracks would be found in the snow, and these tire tracks would lead police to a prime suspect, a military man who, up until this point, wasn't even on their radar. Why would he be? This man was the commander of Canada's largest Air Force base, not exactly their usual type of suspect. But on February 7, 2010, after an intensive 10-hour police interview, the floodgates would open. This unlikely suspect would confess not only to the murder of Jessica Lloyd, but also the murder of Corporal Mary France Como in nearby Brighton, Ontario, as well as the 2 attacks in Tweed and 82 break-and-enters and theft of women's underwear. This is the story of Colonel Russell Williams. David Russell Williams was born in Cardiff, South Wales in 1963. His parents were Cedric David Williams and Christine Nani Williams. His father worked as a metallurgist and would relocate the family to Canada when Russell was only 5, after he was offered a position at a research facility in Chalk River, Ontario. Russell also had a younger brother named Harvey. The family lived in the nearby community of Deep River, a town built by the federal government in 1945 to house the families of the scientists and other workers from the Nuclear Research Laboratory. It was a very strange town, built in a mostly rural area, and Deep River was also known for having one of the highest ratios of PhDs in the country. There were 130 people with doctorate degrees in a population of 5,000 back in 1971. The marriage between Russell's parents was brief, lasting only a few years. His mother would end up filing for divorce after catching her husband having an affair with a family friend. Christine would get remarried a short time after the divorce was final, though, to a man named Jerry Solfka, who was a nuclear engineer and who was also recently divorced. Weirdly enough, Russell's father would also get remarried to Jerry Solfka's first wife, Marilyn. And growing up, Russell and his brother Harvey would take their stepfather's last name. The new blended family would eventually move to the Scarborough Bluffs area, and Russell would attend Birchmount Park Collegiate in Scarborough for school. In 1979, Jerry Solfka took a job in South Korea, where he would be overseeing a reactor project, so the entire family packed up and moved again. Russell and his brother would live in South Korea for about a year, before moving back to Canada, where both brothers were enrolled in Upper Canada College, an elite boarding school. Former alumni of Upper Canada College includes judges, premiers, Olympic athletes, Rhodes Scholars, and lieutenant governors. Several former classmates remembered Russell as a quiet and hardworking student, and another classmate who attended Upper Canada College with Russell said that he was pretty good at flying under the radar, and that most would remember him as a mysterious student and a really good musician. And then there were other former classmates who remembered him as stuck up, saying that he pretty much played the trumpet and kept to himself. In 1982, Russell graduated from Upper Canada College, and that same year would enroll in the University of Toronto's Scarborough campus, majoring in economics and political science. By some horrible coincidence, another man who would also go on to be one of Canada's most infamous serial killers was also enrolled at the University of Toronto's Scarborough campus, and also majored in economics, graduating only 1 year after Russell. That man was none other than Paul Bernardo, who for 3 years beginning in 1987 was terrorizing young women in the Scarborough area. He gained a reputation for stalking and attacking women, usually after they got off the bus at night. The media would nickname him the Scarborough Rapist, and a total of 15 attacks would later be linked to Bernardo. After Williams was arrested years later, a salacious article was released based on the word of unnamed police sources. These sources suggested that Williams and Bernardo were friends during this time at university, and not only partied together, but competed with each other. However, other than this one random unnamed police source, no additional evidence was ever brought forward to prove these allegations. Bernardo's father was even interviewed, who said that Paul might have bumped into a Russ Solfka on campus, but he definitely wasn't friends with him. During his last year at university, Russell decided he wanted to become a pilot and enrolled in flying lessons at Buttonville Airport just north of Toronto. And in 1987, Russell would graduate from the University of Toronto, and that same year would enroll in the Canadian Armed Forces. Around this time, he decided to take back his father's last name and go by Russell Williams. In the late 80s, while he was in Calgary, Alberta, he would meet a woman named Mary Elizabeth Harriman. She had a degree from the University of Guelph in applied science, with a focus on nutrition, and had just completed an MBA in adult education. At the time she met Russell, Mary Elizabeth was working at the Dairy Nutrition Council of Alberta. The two would marry in a small ceremony at the Winnipeg Art Gallery in June of 1991. Russell was 28 years old and Mary Elizabeth was 33. From the beginning, Russell was an ambitious military man who was promoted quickly through the ranks. His first post was Portage la Prairie, Manitoba, then CFB Moose Jaw, a training base for pilots. Within 3 years, Russell earned his wings and worked as an instructor on the CT-134 Beach Musketeer at the Canadian Forces Flying Training School. In 1992, Williams was selected, along with 4 other pilots, to perform at a Musket Gold's air show. The air show was considered to be a huge success, resulting in Russell being promoted to captain shortly afterwards. Later that year, the couple would move to the East Coast. Russell was posted to CFB Shearwater, located in Nova Scotia, one of the smallest Air Force bases in the country. Here, Russell would patrol the coast in a CC-144 Challenger. 2 years later in 1994, the couple moved to Ottawa, where Mary Elizabeth took a job with the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and Russell took up a role with the 412 Transport Squadron, the only 8-wing Trenton unit based in the National Capital Region. For 6 years, Russell Williams' primary responsibility was flying VIPs, including former Prime Minister Stephen Harper and Jacques Chrétien, the Governor-General of Canada, and the Duke of Edinburgh. In 1995, Russell and Mary Elizabeth purchased a home in the bedroom community of Orleans, a suburb of Ottawa. The house was located on Wilkie Drive, a street that was home to many members of the military and law enforcement, and the couple would live in this home for the next 13 years. Neighbors would say that the couple was known as quiet and polite, but were very private people. Mary Elizabeth was known as the more talkative of the two, and would make small talk with the neighbors about golf, her cat, and her job. But for the most part, they didn't share much about their private life. The two could sometimes be spotted walking hand in hand around their neighborhood, and Russell could also be seen jogging in the evening. Travel was also a part of Mary Elizabeth's job, and when she arrived home from one of the many trips she made as the Associate Executive Director of the Heart and Stroke Foundation, Russell could be seen carrying her luggage into the house. One of their Wilkie Drive neighbors described Russell and Mary Elizabeth as the perfect power couple, as they both had jobs that took them away from home, sometimes for long periods of time. In 1999, Russell was promoted to the rank of Major and appointed Director General Military Careers, an administrative position assessing the future of senior military pilots. A few years would pass, and then in 2001, some unexpected family drama occurred. Russell's mother and stepfather divorced. Because Russell's family distanced themselves from the media spectacle after he was arrested, no one really knows the exact conversation that took place. We only know that after the divorce, Russell would cut off all contact with his brother and mother. Friends would say that Russell never talked about it, and they didn't push because the topic seemed to be off limits. During this time, though, Russell's career would continue to progress upwards, and he would receive perfect reviews, medals, and promotions. In 2004, after graduating with a Master of Defense Studies from Royal Military College, Russell was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and became Commanding Officer of 437 Transport Squadron at CFB Trenton, the Airbus unit that flies troops, supplies, and VIPs overseas. However, Trenton is a 3-hour drive from Ottawa, where the couple lived. So in August of that same year, Russell and Mary Elizabeth purchased a cottage on Cozy Cove Lane in the tiny town of Tweed, Ontario, just north of Belleville. Tweed was just a 40-minute drive away from Trenton, and just under 2.5 hours away from Ottawa. Over the next 16 months, Russell would spend most weeknights alone on Cozy Cove Lane. On weekends, he either drove back to Ottawa or Mary Elizabeth would visit the cottage. During his 2 years at the post in Trenton, he took on an additional role and served 6 months as the commanding officer theater support element for Camp Mirage, the secret military base in Dubai that linked Trenton to the Afghanistan war effort. One of the women Russell Williams would later murder, Corporal Mary France Como, also served at Camp Mirage in 2001, 3 years before Williams arrived. After Russell returned to Canada, he would continue to be promoted. He took on an administrative role in Ottawa and was appointed to Directorate of Air Requirements, an agency in charge of procuring airplanes. He would spend 2.5 years in this role, reporting to Lieutenant General Angus Watt, the man who would later recommend Russell's promotion to colonel. In September of 2007, strange break-and-enters were taking place in Tweed, although in most cases the homeowners weren't even aware that someone had been in their home, so most of the break-ins wouldn't be reported to police. This was partially because many people in Tweed at the time didn't lock their doors. There was no need to. Tweed was a town with hardly any crime. But now a fetish burglar was on the loose with an unusual calling card. He would leave money, or credit cards, or other expensive items untouched, but would clean out the homeowner's underwear drawers. On the evening of October 19th, a family came home after attending a barbecue with neighbors. When they entered their home, they found an intruder inside, wearing a hoodie, shorts, and running shoes. The home belonged to the daughter of Russell Williams' next-door neighbor, a man named Larry Jones. The house was dark, so no one was able to get a detailed description of the man before he ran off into the woods. The family looked around their home, and they didn't notice anything had been stolen, so they initially didn't report the break-in to the police. However, 10 days later, they would contact authorities after hearing about another break-in in the area and assumed the two were related. Even though the family was certain that nothing had been stolen from the home, they couldn't have been more wrong. The burglar had made off with 14 pieces of clothing, including underwear, bras, and bathing suits. And they also didn't notice that the intruder came back again the next night and broke in again through an open door, this time stealing another 9 pairs of underwear. 8 months later, starting in May of 2008, similar break-ins involving theft of lingerie were taking place in the bedroom community of Orleans. The first reported event involved homeowners who lived with their daughter, who was a young adult at the time of the incident. She noticed some lingerie she had recently purchased was missing, and on June 3, 2008, she realized the screen to a living room window was also missing. The family contacted police who examined the home and the exterior, but other than the missing screen, there was no other damage to the house. That break-in netted the thief a total of 15 pieces of bras and underwear. In mid-June, there would be another break-in on nearby Cara Crescent in Orleans. A woman who lived with her 24-year-old daughter arrived home to find her front door was unlocked and her basement window had been pushed open. She didn't notice anything missing at first. However, when her daughter arrived home, she noted that numerous pieces of bras, underwear, and sex toys were missing from her dresser drawer. This time, the burglar made off with 87 pieces of lingerie. Ottawa police were once again contacted about the break-and-enter and the contents that were stolen from the house, and they were starting to get concerned about the nature of these crimes. Then in October of 2008, a woman was getting ready to go to the gym when she noticed that all of her underwear was gone from the basket in the closet where she normally kept them. After hearing about similar underwear theft in the area, she too would contact the police, who noticed that the screen to a rear window had been cut. Altogether, 24 pieces of clothing, including underwear, bras, slips, and tops, were stolen from the home. That same month, from October 24th to the 26th, a family with 4 children were out of town. They lived in Orleans on nearby Apollo Way, and when they returned, they immediately noticed someone had been in the house. The basement window was open half an inch, and there were mud streaks on the wall underneath the window, as well as a trail of leaves leading from the basement up to the main floor. The back door was also unlocked, and the homeowners were positive the house was secured before they left. One of the daughters also found several of her photo albums and photographs laid out on the floor of her bedroom. Police were contacted, who advised the family about the recent underwear thefts in the area. They were told to check all their dresser drawers and laundry. The underwear thief had struck again, this time running off with 39 pieces of underwear. Then the youngest daughter, a 12-year-old girl, would log into her computer the following day, only to find a creepy message left behind. Someone had opened a Word document and left it open with the word merci, the French word for thank you. A folder on her computer containing pictures of her and her family had also been opened. Initially, the Ottawa police had not been too concerned about the stolen lingerie. After all, it was just underwear. No one had been home when the burglar struck, and at the time, there were several lingerie thieves operating in the Ottawa area, which is disturbing in more ways than one. One man was even spotted sneaking out of an apartment building, carrying a laundry basket filled with women's underwear. But by October 31st, 2008, the Ottawa police would issue a press release warning the public about the strange break-and-enters in the area. It read, quote, "Due to the peculiar nature of these instances, the Ottawa police wish to remind the public to be vigilant and ensure they secure their home at all times." By this point, 15 fetish burglaries had taken place in both Orleans and Tweed, all of them occurring on streets close to Russell Williams' home. After issuing their press release in the fall of 2008, the Ottawa Police Department would take these break-ins and theft of women's underwear seriously. They began a surveillance operation, hoping to catch the thief in the act. They used unmarked vehicles, as well as undercover officers would stroll the neighborhood of Orleans throughout the evening, pretending to be residents out for late-night walks. They also went door to door and warned homeowners about the bizarre lingerie burglar. The rash of fetish break-ins in 2008 left many in the neighborhood of Orleans feeling on edge. Many homeowners would end up installing bars on their basement windows and surveillance systems as a deterrent. In early December of 2008, the owner of a home on Wilkie Drive was on vacation with his girlfriend, who also kept many personal belongings at his house. On December 10th, the couple would receive a call from the homeowner's brother, who was watching the house for them while they were away. He informed them that the house had been broken into. Police were once again contacted, and they would discover footprints in the snow in the backyard. The prints led directly to the patio door, which was unlocked with the screen pushed open. When the homeowner returned on December 14th, he also found that several window locks had been damaged on the main floor. Nothing looked like it was missing from the home, until his girlfriend checked her underwear drawer and found that 20 pieces of lingerie and 7 sex toys were missing. These strange underwear heists in Orleans would continue into the new year of 2009. From December 29th to January 2nd, a family who lived on Cara Crescent was out of town. When they arrived home, their 15-year-old daughter noticed that all of her underwear, including bathing suits, dresses, tank tops, and many of her photographs, including headshots from modeling agencies, were missing. The burglar had upped the ante. He made off with 68 pieces of assorted clothing. The teenager also noticed that many items in her room, such as paintings, had been altered or moved. Again, police were called to the home, and a report was filed. And while searching her bedroom for additional evidence, dried semen would also be found on top of her dresser. A sample was sent to the Center for Forensic Science. However, it was deemed not suitable for DNA. Nothing else had been taken from the home, and it was clear to police that the teenager was the primary target of whoever entered the house. Following the break-in, the young girl was so terrified she wouldn't sleep in her bedroom, and instead slept in the spare room with the family dog for the next 3 months. Jim Van Allen was a criminal profiler with the Ontario Provincial Police Behavioral Science Unit. He would be brought in to assist the Ottawa police with their investigation, and was asked to create a criminal profile of the offender. It was his opinion that the break-ins were becoming more aggressive, and he was afraid the crimes would escalate further because of their sexual nature. Stealing underwear was one thing, but the trail of mud and leaves on the floor, the scattered photographs, the open message on the computer screen, and the bodily fluids left behind at the scene suggested to Detective Van Allen that the intruder was getting a thrill out of invading the homeowner's space. It was also his opinion that it was only a matter of time before the perpetrator hurt someone physically. In the meantime, Ottawa police were still completely unaware that the same type of fetish break-ins were occurring over 200 kilometers away in Tweed, because Tweed was under a different police jurisdiction and the two departments were not communicating. And while Ottawa police had issued a warning to the public, reminding residents to stay vigilant, no alert was ever issued for the community of Tweed. This was primarily because most of the break-ins in Tweed were not reported to the Ontario Provincial Police, and they were completely unaware there was even an issue in the first place. In January of 2009, Russell Williams was posted to the Canadian Forces Language School in Gatineau, Quebec, for 6 months of intensive French language training. Gatineau is across the river from Ottawa and about a 30-minute drive away from Orleans. And during this time, Ottawa police still had no suspects for the fetish break-ins, and the intruder was about to become more brazen. In April of 2009, the underwear thief would break into the same house in Tweed 3 nights in a row, and then hit up the same address again 2 more times in May. And then, on June 19th of 2009, the fetish burglar broke into a home on Cara Crescent in Orleans and stole every piece of underwear in the house. A 24-year-old woman lived at this home with her father, and the two were out of town from June 18th to the 20th. Before they left, she made sure that a wooden dowel was lodged behind the back sliding door to keep it secure. They would return home late in the evening on June 20th, but didn't notice the house had been broken into until the following morning. Her underwear drawer had been completely emptied, and she was also missing bras and underwear from the clean clothes pile, as well as the dirty laundry basket. Dresses and bathing suits were missing from her closet, and she also noticed some of her ID had been laid out on the dresser of the spare room. The theft of all her underwear and other lingerie was already strange enough, but she was stunned to discover that expensive jewelry she owned had not been stolen. When she walked around the house to determine where the intruder entered, she noticed the wooden stick behind the back patio door had been removed. A screen to a basement window was also missing, and the frame had been pushed in. A grand total of 186 pieces of clothing were stolen from the home. 1 month after this incident, Russell Williams would be promoted to the rank of colonel, and was now the base commander of 8 Wing at CFB Trenton, Canada's largest Air Force base, with over 3,000 employees as well as 600 civilians. During times of war, 8 Wing is where the bodies of soldiers first arrive home. Arctic operations are also stationed on the base, as well as disaster relief. Russell was given living accommodations on the base, but he chose to stay at his cottage on Cozy Cove Lane during the week, which was a short 40-minute drive away from CFB Trenton. And on the weekends he would make the drive back to Ottawa, or Mary Elizabeth would join him in Tweed. It didn't take long after being sworn in as base commander for Russell Williams to resume his double life. And after he was promoted, the frequency of his break-and-enters did not slow down. If anything, they intensified. There were a total of 10 homes broken into during his first 2 months on the job in his new role as base commander. A house was broken into on July 21st on Cozy Cove Lane, the same street where Russell lived, and a nearby house on Sulphur Road was broken into on the 24th, 25th, and 26th. And on the last weekend of the month of July, a house on Matthew Drive in Orleans was broken into 2 days in a row. The intruder actually had the nerve to return a third time on the 27th, but noticed that the homeowners were in the house. 52 items were stolen from these break-ins, including dozens of photographs. And throughout all of this, Russell Williams was able to stay on top of his duties as base commander of CFB Trenton. During the month of August, he kept up appearances with multiple events and charity functions. He was also busy building community relationships and meeting with John Williams, the mayor of Quinte West, almost every week. In mid-September, Russell would invite Mayor Williams to join him on a 3-day trip to Alert, the most northern, continuously inhabited place in the world. Located on Ellesmere Island, Alert has no permanent residents who live there, and it was first settled as a weather station back in the 1950s. Today, Canadian Armed Forces personnel, Department of National Defence employees, and Environment Canada make up the entire population of CFS Alert. With about 55 full-time personnel at the station, typically serving between 3 to 6 months tours of duty there. Russell Williams and his group flew out to the Arctic on September 14th, on an exhausting 12-hour flight each way. They would land back in Trenton in the early evening of September 16th. Everyone who participated on that trip went straight home afterwards. It was assumed that Russell Williams did too, but he didn't. At this point in the story, he had committed more than 30 fetish break-ins in the town of Tweed alone, and things were about to take a more disturbing turn. In the early morning hours of September 17th, a young mother would be attacked in her own home. She will be referred to as Jane Doe because her identity is protected by a court-ordered publication ban. 20-year-old Jane lived with her boyfriend in Tweed and her 2-month-old daughter, although her boyfriend was a truck driver and worked out of town most nights during the week, so she was usually alone with her child. On September 16th, between 9 and 10 p.m., Jane returned home from a visit with her mother. She made sure the front door was locked, but did not check the back patio door. She assumed it was still locked from the previous night. At around 11 p.m., Jane would fall asleep. In the middle of the night, she would suddenly be woken up by someone holding down her head. Jane thought she was having a bad dream at first, but would quickly realize an intruder was in her home. There was a struggle, and she broke a chain that was around his neck, but the man was able to restrain her by pinning her down for what Jane estimated to be 30 minutes. She asked him if he was going to kill her. The man said no, but would not say what his intentions were. He then asked Jane how long had she lived at that address, and where the father of her child was. She replied she had lived there for a month, but ignored his second question, refusing to answer him. The man would then tie Jane up, and then force her to pose as he took photographs of her. He had also blindfolded her, so Jane was unable to get a description of the intruder's face. At one point, it sounded like the man left the room, and then returned, but because Jane was blindfolded, she couldn't be sure. But it sounded to her like he was digging through her underwear drawer. She would later note that several pairs of underwear and bras were missing. Finally, the man would tell her he was leaving and wanted her to count to 300. Jane got to 70 and then stopped, but he was still in the home and told her to keep counting. When Jane reached 200, she yelled out, but no one responded. She untied her blindfold and immediately called 911. The time was now 3 in the morning. When police arrived, she told them that although she was blindfolded, to her the man seemed like a dad, and estimated his age to be between 30 and 50 years old. He was wearing hiking boots and had a ring on his finger, although she couldn't be sure which hand it was. He was also wearing a tight sweater, which she ripped during the struggle with her attacker. He also tried to manipulate his voice when he spoke, by speaking in a deep, raspy voice. The camera he used looked expensive, and she thought he took about 7 photos. So police would get to work and conduct a door-to-door search, asking neighbors if they saw or heard anything suspicious. One of the neighbors who was questioned was Larry Jones, who lived next door to Russell Williams and who also lived on Cozy Cove Lane for 43 years. While speaking to Larry, one of the officers would ask him who owned the house next door to him. When Larry told the officer Colonel Russell Williams lived there, the cop initially thought that Jones was joking. When he realized that Larry was being serious, the officer responded, quote, "Well, I guess we don't have to look at him then." Police continued to search the Cozy Cove Lane area, including the lake for boats, but found nothing or no one who seemed suspicious. However, when the OPP forensic team arrived to Jane's a few hours later, they found that a screen had been cut on one of the side windows of the home. They also found that all the sheets and blankets had been stripped from Jane's bed, a duvet on the floor had been stripped of its cover, and a male DNA sample was found on the back of her neck. Jim Van Allen of the OPP, who was assisting the Ottawa police with their fetish break-ins, opened a new file for Jane Doe's attack. The crimes were over 200 kilometers apart, and at this point there was nothing to suggest the crimes were linked, because hardly any of the underwear break-and-enters in Tweed had been reported to police. There was also the added conundrum of Van Allen not entirely believing that the assault happened in the first place, based on Jane's statement. Some of the things the intruder had said to her seemed odd to Van Allen. For example, the man had told Jane to roll over on her tummy so he could tie her up. In Van Allen's words, he had never heard a sex offender use the word tummy in his entire life. After giving her statement to police, Jane Doe packed up some belongings and went to stay with a friend in Belleville. She would never again return to that home. Only a few hours after the assault on Jane Doe, Williams was back to keeping up appearances at the base. He had a meeting in Belleville to discuss a charity event with members of Criminal Intelligence Service Ontario and watched as Kevin Fast from Coburg broke a Guinness World Record as he pulled a C-17 Globemaster down the tarmac. After that, the colonel visited the base engineering shop, where Russell spent a couple of hours talking with the troops, changing a tire, doing a bit of welding, and tinkering with some weapons. His day would end with a barbecue back at headquarters. He did all of this with little to no sleep over the course of several days, and nobody suspected a thing. Meanwhile, it didn't seem the Ontario Provincial Police appreciated the seriousness of this recent sexual assault. There was a man out there targeting the homes of women who lived alone, and for whatever reason, the OPP didn't bother issuing a safety warning to the public. This, in hindsight, would be a huge mistake, because 2 weeks later, there would be another attack in Tweed. Normally, the identity of a sexual assault victim is protected by a court-ordered publication ban. However, the second victim, Lori Mazacott, would apply to have the publication ban on her identity lifted. In an interview with CBC News, she said that speaking out about the assault was part of her personal healing. On September 30th, 2009, 46-year-old Lori Mazacott was curled up on her couch watching Law & Order and Without a Trace. She was exhausted after a busy day of cleaning and rearranging furniture, and at some point in the evening would fall asleep on the couch. When she woke up hours later, she was being hit in the head with a flashlight and smothered by a blanket. And she also heard a man's voice saying that a gang was in her house and she was being robbed. Then the intruder did something odd. After Lori told him that she had a headache from being hit, the man got her a glass of water and an aspirin. He would then blindfold and restrain Lori, and then cut the clothes off her body with a large knife. For an agonizing 3.5 hours, the intruder would force Lori to pose while he photographed her. After the man fled the scene, she managed to call 911. However, Lori was left tied up in a makeshift straitjacket. Her arms were cinched to her sides, and she was forced to stay like this for another 5 hours. Police apparently told her they needed to wait for OPP photographers to take pictures of her restraints first. During this time, she was still naked with a comforter on top of her, and would say that she was denied medical attention. When Lori was finally untied, she was allowed to put on a bathrobe and was taken outside to wait for another 3 hours, while the police searched her house for evidence. The OPP seriously bungled this investigation. While questioning neighbors of Lori, they let it slip out that they thought she was lying, and was trying to copy the first attack on Jane Doe. Except that Lori didn't know anything about the attack on Jane Doe. Nobody did, because the police never issued a media release regarding the incident. Lori would then be interviewed by police. She told them that the man was between 30 and 40 years of age, and she thought she had heard his voice before. Finally, police would confess to her they had been investigating a similar incident that occurred only 2 weeks earlier, but they didn't warn the public, telling her, quote, "We're very sorry we didn't get this out to the public. I can guarantee you this will make the news tomorrow morning." The next day, as police cruisers still surrounded Lori's house, Russell Williams would ask another neighbor what all the commotion was about. He then headed to work, where he awarded a service medal to a fellow airman and met with engineering officials to discuss ongoing construction projects at the base. By this stage, 58 break-ins and thefts of underwear had occurred in the Tweed and Ottawa areas. Many of them occurred on Cozy Cove Lane, the same street where Russell Williams lived in Tweed. And most of these break-ins occurred on Friday and Saturday nights. Investigators still had no reason to consider Williams a suspect. Instead, they were focusing on his next-door neighbor, Larry Jones, because Lori Mazacott had told police her attacker's voice sounded like Larry's. On October 29, 2009, Larry Jones had returned home from a partridge hunt, only to find his house crawling with OPP officers who had executed a search warrant. They informed him that he was a suspect in the attacks on both women, and that they were looking for thong underwear, bras, and a baby blanket, which were some of the items missing from the victims' homes. Jones would also agree to be interviewed by police, as well as provide fingerprints, DNA, and was also subjected to a 3-hour polygraph.
My dog and I come back from partridge hunting in the Jeep, and we pulled into our road here and noticed a lot of cars at our house. And I said, God, it looks like a party going on that I wasn't invited to. Yeah, and got a little closer, and I noticed one of the OPP markings on the vehicle had been painted over. And I said, geez, it looks like police are here. So I got closer, pulled in the driveway. 2 officers dressed in suits come out the door, and they said, you Larry Jones? I said, yes. Well, we have a search warrant for your house. And they flashed this paper at me, and I said, what's going on? They said, well, we can't tell you right now. I want you to come in the house and unlock your safes. And they pushed a paper in my hand, which apparently was a search warrant. And I started to look at it, and he said, you haven't got time to look at that now. We want you downstairs to open those safes, so follow me. So I started in, and he put his hand on my elbow and kind of guided me in so far, and I was looking around what's going on. And I asked him a couple times, well, did my house get broken into, or what's going on here? And he said, we can't tell you. So I took him downstairs and unlocked all the safes, and our gun safes and stuff, ammunition safe. And then they said, well, we'd like to take you over to Madoff for questioning. So they escorted me back outside, and with their hand on my elbow through the door, and put me in this car. and took me to Madoc for questioning, which I didn't think I had any choice in the matter because they seemed like they're quite forceful in what they're doing, and they're going to do it. Either that or handcuff me and take me away. So I went voluntarily because I had done nothing wrong. And on the way to Madoc, they told me that I may be a suspect for the two assaults down the road. And I said, "You got to be kidding!" I just passed out. I couldn't believe it. And I said, "Well, I had nothing to do with this." I said, "And you won't find anything in my house that had anything to do with this." And went to Madoc for a 3.5-hour interrogation. It was quite an ordeal.
According to Larry, his family was endlessly harassed by police for weeks before they realized he wasn't the right suspect. The same day Jones was being interrogated by police, Russell Williams was once again posing for a photo op. This time with former General Rick Hillier at a store at CFB Trenton, where Hillier was plugging his book. Several weeks would pass before the attacker would strike again. He was well aware the police had opened an investigation regarding both assaults in Tweed and was laying low, at least for now. November 17, 2009 was Ann Marson Cook's 48th birthday. Ann lived in a rural area just outside of Belleville, a town of 50,000 about halfway between Toronto and Ottawa. Her home sat just off of Highway 37. And she lived here with her husband, who often worked out of town on business, and had been away from her house the previous evening. On the afternoon of the 17th, she arrived home to change her clothes for her birthday party that evening at a friend's house. As she was getting ready, she noticed her dresser drawers beside her bed were open, and all of her sex toys were gone. At first, Anne thought it was a prank. When her neighbor Howard Gray arrived to pick her up for the evening, she asked him if she should call the police. But Howard would talk her out of reporting the break-in and said that the missing sex toys would only be a huge laugh down at the police station and that they wouldn't take it seriously. Anne knew about the attacks in Tweed, but at the time wouldn't connect these crimes to her stolen sex toys. It was decided that Anne would sleep at Howard's house that evening, but before they left, they would walk around her home and make sure every door and window was locked first. When Anne returned home the next morning, she would discover that her underwear drawers were open and all of it was missing, 116 pieces to be exact. And an older computer had also been turned on in her office. The screensaver had been disabled and a Word document was open with a chilling message typed out in large font. It read, "Go ahead, phone the police. I want to show the judge your really big dildos." The message indicated that the intruder had been hiding somewhere in the house when Anne returned home to change her clothes the day before and had overheard the conversation with her neighbor. This time, Anne would report the break-in to the Belleville police, and she started to suspect it could have some connection to the crimes taking place in Tweed. But when Belleville police came to her house to search for evidence, they could only find a partial fingerprint that could be of interest. And when Anne asked the police if the break-ins could possibly be related to the attacks in Tweed, cops didn't know what she was talking about, even though Tweed was only a short drive away. The Belleville police and the Ontario Provincial police were also not communicating. Ann Marson Cook had dodged a bullet that night. Only 1 week later, the intruder would graduate from stealing underwear and sex toys to becoming a killer. 37-year-old Corporal Mary France Como was born in Quebec City, but grew up in various places, spending parts of her childhood in Quebec, New Brunswick, and Germany. She was from a military family, with her father, grandfather, and 4 other family members all serving, and she would eventually follow in their footsteps. In 1995, Mary France joined the reserves, and by the early 2000s, she was part of Operation Apollo, which was Canada's first deployment of military personnel to Afghanistan. In 2008, after serving over a decade in the armed forces, Mary France became a flight attendant with 437 Transport Squadron at CFB Trenton. Mary France lived alone in a developing neighborhood in Brighton, Ontario, that was home to many military members. One co-worker who worked with Mary France at CFB Trenton described her as a wonderful person who was always smiling. In November of 2009, she would accompany Prime Minister Stephen Harper on a round-world trip to Japan, Singapore, and India. This would be her final mission. After returning home from this trip, Corporal Como noticed that someone had been through her underwear drawer. She blamed her boyfriend Paul, who would strongly deny it. On the evening of November 23rd, Mary France spoke to Paul on the phone before going to bed, and the two would make plans to meet for dinner the following night. But Mary France didn't show up, and she wasn't answering her phone. By November 25th, Paul was becoming concerned for her welfare, so he drove to Mary France's house and knocked on her front door. Her car was in the driveway, but she didn't answer the door. Finally, Paul would go to the back of the house, where he found the back patio door unlocked. He would be the one to discover Mary France's body, on her bed, wrapped in a duvet. Her death was Brighton's first homicide in over 30 years. There were initial police reports that her death was a suspected suicide, which was just a ridiculous assumption. An autopsy report showed that she had suffered at least 5 blows to her head. There were blood drops all over the basement floor, where it was clear that a struggle had occurred, and there were also blood stains on the floor in a pattern consistent with blood-soaked hair. Footprints and blood were also discovered in the basement, as well as an obvious dent in the drywall at the bottom of the basement stairs. Mary France had been badly beaten and had definitely put up a fight with her attacker. There were also remnants of tape on her face, suggesting that her nose and mouth had been covered at one point, and wide ligature marks were left on her wrists, made by a restraint at least half an inch wide. But when the police realized they were dealing with a murder, they told the public there was no need for concern, thinking they were dealing with a domestic violence issue. Her boyfriend Paul was immediately considered the main suspect. There were rumors the two weren't getting along. However, he had an airtight alibi and passed a polygraph. Her former common-law partner Alain was also interviewed and cleared by police. Again, police had no reason, at least not yet anyway, to connect the slaying of Corporal Mary France Como to Russell Williams or the Tweed assaults. But the initial OPP press release seemed to contradict the violent bloody crime scene that was left behind in her house. It read, quote, "There are presently no issues with regards to public safety." That didn't do much to ease people's nerves in Brighton. But police weren't saying much else. They wouldn't release Mary France's cause of death, as it was their holdback evidence, and the public was also unaware that a bloodied footwear impression had also been left behind. Male DNA belonging to their suspect was also found on the sink of her bathroom. The day after Mary France Como's body was discovered was business as usual for Russell Williams. He took part in a charity event at the base called Jail and Bail, where he was photographed smiling after being mock arrested for being too young to be a wing commander. A few days before Mary France's funeral, her father would receive a letter from Base Commander Colonel Russell Williams. It read, "Dear Mr. Como, I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the men and women at 8 Wing Trenton to express my sincere condolences on the tragic death of your daughter. Mary France was a professional, caring, and compassionate woman who earned the respect of all with whom she came into contact. She set high standards for herself and others, and was devoted to the well-being of those around her. Mary France made a lasting impact in Trenton and will be sorely missed by her friends. Please let me know whether there is anything I can do to help during this very difficult time. You and your family are in our thoughts and prayers. Our dearest sympathy, David Russell Williams." On December 4th, Mary France Como's funeral service was held and attended by hundreds of friends and family and military personnel. Despite his offer of support, Russell Williams did not attend her funeral service. She would be buried at the National Military Cemetery in Ottawa. A Facebook page set up in her memory described Mary France as charming, intelligent, sparky, bubbly, generous, funny, reliable, and hardworking. Meanwhile, life for Russell Williams would be busy in the months of December 2009 and into the new year. In mid-December, Russell and his wife moved from the home on Wilkie Drive to a new home on Edison Avenue in Westboro, where Mary Elizabeth would live during the week and Russell would continue to stay at the cottage. He also attended a press conference for the Olympic torch relay, issued his Christmas message to the base, and was honored with the Canadian Forces First Clasp, an award that recognizes military members with 22 years of service. And then on January 12, 2010, a massive earthquake struck the country of Haiti, killing over 200,000 people. Russell was in charge of the relief operation and managing the deployment of over 2,000 soldiers and thousands of kilograms of food, water, and medical supplies. On January 17th, the Defense Minister Peter MacKay and the Chief of the Defense Staff, Walter Natinchik, stopped by for their tour of CFB Trenton, where they met with Russell and watched the troops load relief supplies bound for Haiti. Only 11 days later, Jessica Lloyd would go missing. 27-year-old Jessica Elizabeth Lloyd was born in Ottawa. Her dad was in the Navy. He would pass away from cancer when Jessica was only 14. She graduated from Quinte Secondary School in 2000 and studied business administration at Loyola College. She had an older brother, Andy, who would describe his sister as a witty, very social person with lots of friends. One friend would say Jessica had a unique sense of humor and was quick with the one-liners and funny comments. Life was going well for Jessica. She had found a career as a transit planner at Tri-Board Student Transportation Services, and she had just purchased her childhood home from her mother Roxanne a year earlier. On the evening of January 28, 2010, Jessica went over to a friend's house to watch a movie. Later, when she returned home, she sent that friend a text message to let them know she arrived home safely. The time was 10:36. This would be the last time anyone heard from Jessica again. The next day, when she failed to show up for work, her coworkers immediately sensed that something was wrong. She had worked for this company for 2 years and had never once arrived late. She was known as someone who was responsible. Jessica's mother, Roxanne, used to work for the same company, so her coworkers reached out to her to see if she knew anything about Jessica's whereabouts. Both Roxanne and Andy would go over to Jessica's house to check up on her. When they arrived, they found Jessica's car parked in the driveway. The doors were locked, and there was no sign the house had been broken into. All of her possessions were inside the home, including her car keys, cell phone, purse, wallet, eyeglasses, and identification. Also, Jessica lived alone on the outskirts of town, so she wouldn't have gone anywhere without her car, which was parked in the driveway. Her family then contacted Belleville police, and a missing persons investigation was opened. From the beginning, the police took this case seriously and considered her disappearance suspicious. A ground search commenced that included members of the Belleville Tactical Team, the ATV unit, and the Auxiliary Police Unit. A forensic team was also dispatched to the house to look for clues, and the OPP also conducted an aerial search over Belleville. The CFB Trenton search and rescue helicopter also aided in the search for Jessica, which would have had to have been approved by Colonel Russell Williams. A public alert was also issued to warn women in the area living alone to take extra precautions when securing their home and to change their personal routine. In the meantime, the community rallied around the Lloyd family and dropped everything to search for Jessica. Friends and family of Jessica Lloyd and hundreds of volunteers handed out missing persons posters in Belleville and the surrounding area, and a Facebook group dedicated to finding Jessica grew to over 45,000 people. In an interview with the Crime Beat podcast, Andy spoke about how he discovered tire tracks and footprints in the snow in the field near Jessica's house, and that the footprints were leading straight to her home. The night before, in the early morning hours of January 29th, around 3 a.m., a man named Lyle Barker and his cousin were driving south down Highway 37, going past Jessica's house. He would spot an SUV parked in a field nearby. He thought the vehicle looked suspicious. It was quite a distance from the road and the nearest house. And given that it was the middle of winter and the middle of the night, the car looked out of place. When the two men returned a few days later, they saw the missing persons posters of Jessica in the area, as well as the police presence around her home, and they immediately reported what they saw in the field that night to the Belleville police. What they saw would be corroborated by another witness who also spotted the SUV. Around 9:30 p.m. on January 28th, when Jessica was out visiting a friend, a Belleville police officer spotted that same suspicious vehicle parked in the field beside Jessica's house. She stopped and knocked on Jessica's door, but of course nobody was home at the time. She made notes about the vehicle, but for whatever reason, she didn't write down the vehicle's make or license plate number. Although at this time, she really didn't have a reason to do so. At this point in the story, it was just a random car in a field. It hadn't been linked to a crime. Not yet, anyway. What that officer didn't know was that the owner of the SUV was a predator, who, at that very moment, was in Jessica's backyard, waiting for her to arrive home. In hindsight, not writing down the vehicle's make and license plate number was a mistake that would come back to haunt the Belleville Police Department. The next morning, Jessica Lloyd would be reported missing, and a simple license plate search would have led police to Russell Williams' Tweed cottage, where she was being held captive. There was also the added conundrum of the three police departments not communicating with each other. Jessica's disappearance initially wasn't linked to the sexual assault cases in Tweed, or the murder of Mary France Como in Brighton, or the break-ins and theft of underwear in Belleville, Tweed, and Orleans. This would all change, however, when the Belleville Police Department realized they were in over their head and needed help with their investigation. They would reach out to the Ontario Provincial Police for assistance and possible links to other crimes. The OPP were already investigating the murder of Mary France Como, the sexual assaults against Laurie Mazacott and Jane Doe, and the fetish break-ins. And they also had access to what was known as the VICLASS database. VICLASS stands for the Violent Crime Linkage System. The database was developed during the 1980s as a way to look for links in unsolved cases, and is mostly used by the RCMP. The similarities between these cases and Jessica Lloyd's disappearance couldn't be ignored. All of these crimes occurred at night, all of them involved breaking into homes, and all of these crimes occurred within an hour's drive of each other. The military had also opened their own investigation into the murder of Mary France Como, and it would take the cooperation of local, provincial, and military police before an arrest would be made. To protect their evidence and their case, police typically don't like to share information with other police agencies. However, they also risked botching the investigation by not talking to each other. One of the most important clues left behind in this case were the tire tracks left in the mud in the field where the SUV was spotted. After consulting with multiple tire shops, as well as the Yukon RCMP database of over 1,100 tire impressions, it was confirmed the tire tracks belonged to a Toyo Open Country HT. The tires and the list of SUVs were fed into a provincial database, which produced a list of 450 potential vehicles that could belong to the suspect. On February 4, 2009, Belleville Police, assisted by members of the Ontario Provincial Police, set up a checkpoint on Highway 37, and for 11 hours, stopped drivers throughout the night. Sergeant Julie Forstill of the Belleville Police told the media that the roadside stops were being done to find information that might help with their investigation, and to speak with anyone who might have been on Highway 37 the previous Thursday evening or Friday morning. This was only partially true. What police didn't release to the public was they were searching for an SUV with Toyo Open Country HT tires, a very unusual type of tire tread. The roadblock wasn't even completely set up yet when police spotted a vehicle with tires that looked like an exact match. Belleville police officers would pull over a silver 2001 Nissan Pathfinder, driven by Colonel Russell Williams. The colonel would identify himself to police as the commander of Trenton Base, while a second officer in the meantime studied his vehicle. The officer who was speaking with Russell that evening initially wasn't suspicious because of who he was. The commander of Canada's largest Air Force base didn't seem like a plausible suspect. But police had a big problem. Russell's vehicle was the only car to drive through the checkpoint that night, with tires that matched the suspicious tracks in the field. He would be allowed to continue on his way, but was immediately placed under surveillance, where a team of undercover officers would follow Russell for the next 3 days. And that's where we will leave things for now. In part 2, I'll cover Russell Williams' interrogation, what finally made him confess to these horrific crimes, his trial, and the evidence presented against him. Thank you so much for watching and taking the time to hang out with me today. If you enjoyed learning about this case, please be sure to like and subscribe. If there's a case you would like me to cover in a future video, let me know in the comments section down below. To support my channel, you can go to Buy Me a Coffee if you would like to donate. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.